Breaking tonight, a Fox News exclusive. We have new information that appears to directly contradict the Biden administration's insistence it had nothing to do with the Justice Department investigations into then former President Trump's alleged retention of classified material and the subsequent raid on his Mar-a-Lago home.
First, I personally approved the decision to seek a search warrant in this matter.
Have you seen Donald Trump's mugshot yet? Mr. President, are you worried at all about that?
I did see it on television.
What'd you think?
Handsome guy. Wonderful guy.
The FBI spent 9 years running 4 separate counterintelligence operations that were targeting Donald Trump and hundreds of Americans. 9 years, 4 operations, hidden files, and fabricated justifications. And every single person who enabled this is still collecting a government paycheck. This isn't about reforming these agencies. This is about why they need to be dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up. Because what you're about to hear proves the permanent bureaucracy in Washington, it's beyond repair. So let me show you the receipts. Just the News, they just published an explosive investigation just yesterday. FBI Director Kash Patel has been personally reviewing 4 code-named counterintelligence operations that ran from summer 2016 to January 2025. These operations: Crossfire Hurricane, Round River, Plasmic Echo, and Arctic Frost. So 4 consecutive operations, all of which were targeting Trump, all of which were targeting his supporters. And according to this article, many of these files were marked prohibited access and hidden from the view, even from most of the FBI agents. So they were running secret investigations against American citizens and hiding the evidence from their own agency. According to Just the News, at least 1,200 people were investigated from 2018 and 2024. They weren't criminals. They weren't foreign agents. They were journalists, members of Congress, lawyers, religious leaders, campaign advisors, and even a filmmaker. People exercising their First Amendment rights, people that were doing their jobs, and people asking the questions of the permanent bureaucracy that they didn't want asked. And the FBI treated them like national security threats. So let's talk about what Kash Patel found. According to the article, whistleblowers inside the FBI, they told Patel that surveillance of Trump figures continued right up to January 2025, right up to his inauguration. So think about that. They were still monitoring the incoming president and his team while he was preparing to take office. The article reports that Trump's future chief of staff, Susie Wiles, she had her communications monitored. Kash Patel himself was a target, and a dozen members of Congress, their staffers, defense lawyers representing Trump, etc. In fact, the FBI was wiretapping defense lawyers. Let that sink in. Now here's where it gets even worse. The Plasmic Echo investigation, that's the classified documents case that led to the FBI raiding Mar-a-Lago. According to Just the News, Kash Patel recently revealed that the FBI agents didn't think that they had a probable case for a search warrant, but they raided the president's home anyway after being overruled by the Biden DOJ. So here's what one agent wrote, and I quote, "We continue to pass versions back and forth after our pause and concern about probable cause for any of the locations outlined. What is the guidance for continuing to work on this document without any new information?" They knew that they didn't have enough evidence. They did it anyway. The article states that Attorney General Merrick Garland personally approved the decision to seek that search warrant. And according to Just the News, the Biden White House was directly linked to that investigation despite their denial. So you have FBI agents with concerns, you have political appointees at the DOJ overruling them, You have a White House that's involved. You also have an unprecedented raid on a former president's home. This is what happens when unelected bureaucrats and political appointees, when they weaponize law enforcement. But here's the operation that should terrify every American: Round River. According to this article, this investigation started by targeting Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani for investigating the Biden family's activities in Ukraine. Then it expanded to target anyone who spoke out about Biden family corruption. Let me read you what Just the News reported. Early whistleblower evidence has raised grave concerns about the potential civil liberty violations, specifically that people may have been targeted solely by virtue of their speech. The article continues, lawmakers fear that the standards for who was targeted were simply talking points, deemed by FBI counterintelligence to be Russian disinformation. If you asked questions about the Biden family, you reported on Hunter Biden, if you investigated Joe Biden's Ukraine dealings, the FBI labeled you a national security threat working for Russia. Not because you committed a crime, not because you had any actual connection to Russia, because the permanent bureaucracy decided that your speech was inconvenient. Senator Chuck Grassley wrote about this in 2022. According to the article, and here's what he said, and I quote, based on allegations, verified and verifiable information on Hunter Biden was falsely labeled as disinformation. So verified information that was labeled improperly as disinformation by the Biden FBI. Article reports that Grassley and Senator Ron Johnson were given what they described as an unnecessary briefing by the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force in August 2020. A briefing designed to undermine their investigation into the Biden family. So the FBI actively worked to sabotage a Senate investigation while simultaneously running a counterintelligence operation targeting people for asking the same questions that those senators were asking. Folks, this is what the permanent bureaucracy looks like when they protect itself and its allies. Now let's talk about the Mar-a-Lago raid again, because there's more. According to Just the News, Kash Patel found proof that under former Director Chris Wray, the FBI obtained Patel's own phone records and those of Susie Wiles. This while Trump announced his 2024 presidential campaign. They also wiretapped a call involving Susie Wiles. The FBI claimed that her defense lawyer consented to this monitoring. But according to the article, that lawyer has adamantly denied ever giving consent. He told Axios, and I quote, "If I ever pulled a stunt like that, I wouldn't and shouldn't have a license to practice law. I am as shocked as Susie." So either that lawyer is lying or somebody at the FBI made a false representation to get a court to authorize the wiretap. False representations to a court to spy on an incoming White House chief of staff. The article reports that sources told Just the News the FBI has an intensive investigation going on, and decisions on whether these charges are warranted and could come in just a couple weeks. Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon, well, she told Just the News that charges are indeed possible. Here's what she said. The Department of Justice does have the tool for conspiracy against these rights. I would say all of these things are on the table for lawyers and for DOJ officials and others who conspired with them, who conspired to violate civil rights. And it could also include executive branch officials from the first administration who knowingly conspired. So again, according to this article, federal prosecutors in Miami, well, they're still investigating the use of intelligence and law enforcement tools against Donald Trump as they build this case that's spanning from 2016, 2020, and now 2024. So charges may be coming, and that's good. But people who violated the civil rights under the color of government power, they should face consequences. But prosecuting individuals, that's not enough. Because here's what we're really looking at. You have 4 consecutive counterintelligence operations that are spanning 9 years. You have 1,200 Americans who were investigated, many of them targeted for just using their speech. And you have files hidden in prohibited access systems so that most FBI agents couldn't see what was happening. You have agents' concerns about probable cause, they're ignored. And you have wiretaps obtained through highly questionable means. You also have an operation that may have labeled verified information as disinformation to protect the Biden family. So the Biden White House was involved in these investigations of their political opponents. There's no doubt about it. You have defense lawyers that are wiretapped, and you have Congress members that are targeted. And all of this was done by the permanent bureaucracy, unelected officials who serve administration after administration, who operate in the shadows, and who hide files, who ignore the concerns of their own agents when those concerns are just inconvenient. And this is why we need reform. And that's also why reform isn't enough. According to Just the News, those who have seen these records say that they chronicle how the FBI's expanded counterterrorism and counterintelligence missions after September 11th, well, they became used for political purposes. So these tools that were meant to prevent another terrorist attack, the tools that were actually meant to catch spies, those tools were turned on American citizens engaged in political activity. The mission was corrupted, and the institution was corrupted. The culture was also corrupted. And you can't fix that with new policies. You can't fix this with additional oversight. Can't fix that by firing a few people at the top. When an institution spends 9 years targeting American citizens for their political activity, when it hides files from its own agents, and when it ignores legal standards that get overruled by political appointees, that institution is broken beyond repair. So here's what needs to happen. First, everyone involved in these 4 operations needs to be identified. Every agent who participated, every supervisor who approved targeting decisions, and every official who hid files or made false representations to the courts. Then they need to be removed, not reassigned, not retired with full pensions, removed from the government service permanently. Second, the entire counterintelligence division needs to be rebuilt from scratch. New leadership, new protocols, new oversight mechanisms that actually work. Because the current system allowed this to happen for 9 years. That current system of oversight failed completely. Third, Congress needs to pass legislation that makes it a federal crime for law enforcement or for intelligence officials to target American citizens for their political speech or activity, with mandatory minimum sentences, no exceptions. If you use your government position to violate someone's civil rights for political purposes, you should go to prison, period. Fourth, any investigation of a political figure, campaign, or administration must be approved by a panel that includes members of both political parties. No more one-sided investigations launched by partisan bureaucrats. And fifth, all counterintelligence files must be accessible to congressional oversight. No more prohibited access files that hide investigations from scrutiny. No more SCIFs full of secret evidence that nobody can see. It's transparency or nothing. But here's the bigger point. The FBI and the DOJ aren't the only agencies with this problem. According to reporting over the last several years, the CIA, the NSA, the IRS, and other 3-letter agencies have all been accused of similar abuses. The permanent bureaucracy runs through each one of these. The the same unelected officials who operate in the shadows, they're all in those. And those who serve administration after administration, who believe that they know better than the elected officials and the American voters, well, they all need to go. So this is the fundamental problem. These agencies, they answer to nobody. They hide behind classification, they claim expertise, they resist oversight, and when they're caught abusing their power, well, they face no consequences, and that has to end. The American people didn't elect FBI agents, they didn't elect CIA analysts, and they didn't elect DOJ lawyers either. But those unelected officials have more power over their lives than most of the elected representatives. They can open up investigations. They can obtain wiretaps. They can target citizens. They can hide files. They can label information as disinformation. And they can work to undermine the elected officials that the people want. They can do all of that in secret. That is not how a constitutional republic is supposed to work. The founders created a system of checks and balances, of accountability, of consent of the governed, but the permanent bureaucracy operates outside of that system that our creators founded. They're not checked, and they're not balanced, they're not accountable, and they sure as hell don't have the consent of the governed. So yes, individuals need to be prosecuted, and yes, Kash Patel, he needs to continue uncovering this evidence, but that's just the beginning. These agencies need to be fundamentally restructured, the permanent bureaucracy needs to be dismantled, and the culture of unaccountable power needs to be destroyed. When you give unelected officials massive power and limited oversight, when you let them operate in secret and hide files, when you don't hold them accountable for abuses, well, guess what? They will use that power for their political purposes. And they do it every single time. So 4 operations over 9 years, 1,200 Americans with hidden files, with ignored legal standards, fabricated justifications, and wiretap defense lawyers, all of this while targeting Americans' free speech. This is what happens when the permanent bureaucracy believes that it's above the law. But Kash Patel is uncovering the evidence, and prosecutors are building these cases as we speak. And Congress does have open investigations. It's all necessary, but it's not sufficient. The American people need to demand a complete institutional reform. Not tweaks, not adjustments, and not new policies. Tear it down, rebuild it with transparency, with accountability, and with real oversight. Also, include the understanding that these agencies serve the American people, not the other way around. Because if we don't fix this now, we just prosecute a few individuals and then move on, it's going to happen again. The next time there's a candidate or a president the permanent bureaucracy doesn't like or feels threatened by, the tools will be used against them. The investigations, they're going to start, and the files will again be hidden. And American citizens, you and I, we're going to be targeted for our political activity, and that is wrong. We have a choice. We can hold these institutions accountable and demand that they be rebuilt, or we can accept the fact that unelected bureaucrats have more power than the voters. I know which choice that I'm making. The question is whether enough Americans care to demand the same.
We won!
Okay, let's go.
We won!